Okay, so James, the agronomy evening, recently you talked about three main things to highlight. One of the first thing really was this 2033 long-term dream. Can you just tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah. So, in a nutshell, I think this goes back to things we've been discussing and praying about really over the last 2.5 years since Louise and I moved and began in the churches here. But I think it's also important to say that when we met on the agronomy evening, this was conversations and prayer that had arisen from meetings with the church wardens and the PCCs from across the three churches in the benefice, particularly in November of last year when we had an away day together at Lancing College. But I think essentially what 2033 is about is really, something to raise our sights and to try and stir our hearts about what we believe God is saying and calling us to in our churches. And I think the starting point for that goes back to when Louise and I first came along to Ashington just before we applied for the post of rector in February 2013. And we sat in a very normal baptism service, and I was absolutely transfixed by the window at the front of the church, which is of Chanctonbury Ring with St Michael the Archangel above it. And I was absolutely transfixed by this window, which isn't particularly outstanding from an aesthetic perspective, but I was just gripped by it throughout the whole service. And then afterwards was just asking the Lord, what was it about that window? And I felt like God said to me, where'd you get angels above the earth? And I was reminded of Jacob's dream in Genesis 28, where he sees a stairway connecting heaven and earth, angels going up and down it. And he wakes up from this dream and he says, how awesome is this place? Surely this is the dwelling place of God. Surely this is the gate of heaven. I think I felt like back in February 2013 that God was really revealing to me what was the underlying DNA for our parishes here and what was his heartbeat for our churches and our communities and this area. And I think the importance of that is, it's a bit like on a personal, spiritual level. When we become a Christian, suddenly we realise, actually, all along throughout our lives, that God has an identity for us in Him. And as new creations, we begin to discover that identity and begin to grow into it. And we become really who we were always designed to be. And now in Christ, we're liberated from all the things that held us back from that, and we begin to grow and be transformed into that person He's made us to be. And I think really that's what I felt God was revealing to me in that for our churches, that despite all the different things that we are and do, that underneath all that God's heartbeat for us is to be an entrance, a gateway for the kingdom of heaven to begin to really pour into our area, this part of the earth, and that all of God's ways were really purposed to be displayed and grow where we are. And so that's why really over the last 2.5 years I've talked about the kingdom coming, and we've kind of used this phrase from the Lord's Prayer to describe God's heart for us. But I think when you try and boil down, what is the kingdom, there are three main places that we have indications about what that looks like from the scriptures. The first is Old Testament prophecy. The second is New Testament teaching and prophecy that we might find in the epistles and ultimately in John's Revelation, the final book of the Bible. And then the third part where that comes to life is really in the life of Jesus. And so Jesus, as we look at his example, as we look at his teaching, and as we look at the things that happened all around him, he begins to say things like, the kingdom has drawn near. The kingdom is within you. The kingdom has come as he comes and liberates everyone around him and comes and demonstrates that as he lived his life. And so really, in a nutshell, I guess that vision for the kingdom begins to come to life when we begin to say, if Jesus was here right now in our churches, if Jesus was walking around our communities, if Jesus and all the things that happened around his life was walking around our villages, what are the sort of things that would be happening? What is the sort of atmosphere change that would be taking place? What would be happening for individuals and for our kind of societies and institutions within our villages? What would happen to the land and creation as Jesus was moving amongst us? And so 2033, I guess, was really me trying to just cast a vision of what that might look like for our context and our area. We have hints and indications from the scriptures about what those sorts of things are, but really putting that into our communities, our context, our lives. 2033 is to say, do you know what, if we set our sights, let's give God long enough to move in great power, but what would that actually look like for us? And so that dream is really just to articulate, what that could look like.
Okay.
And I think really the questions that arise from that are, firstly, wouldn't that be wonderful? Don't we long for God to move amongst us in our lives, in our churches, in our communities? And so if we long for that, and if we really believe God is stirring that, and if we really believe this is his plan, that actually this is the DNA of who we are, then I think what I was sharing on the agronomy evening was, so the short-term implications.
So just before you say that, I mean, I remember at your institution induction service very powerfully how you shared about that, the way that window had struck you and how you were completely convinced that was a prophetic word for you in terms of coming to our benefits, and that was first time I'd met you, first time I'd seen you, and that was fantastic. Some people have said about the 23, just before you get up to the short term aspects, is it a vision that God has given you? Is it a dream? Is it specific? Have you seen all those specific things that God has shown you?
Yeah, I think really, really good question. I think the first thing for that is I do believe we are called to live by faith and to hear what God's saying for the future, and then to reorientate our lives as we receive from him the capacity and ability and his presence in order to do it and to go for it. And so really, I guess when I started, I began to just keep a little notebook with, what could this look like for our area? I began to just almost try and rewrite the future in that sense around what it might look like for the kingdom to come. So I think this is stuff that I've been praying about, keeping a little notebook on, and beginning just to kind of say, okay, Lord, what are the specifics of this? And I think really, I guess boiling that down in essence, as you look through that dream, I would say it wasn't kind of a moment where I was suddenly laid out in my bed and, it was a complete download, but it's something that I've just been working on and working through, and also listening to different prophetic words, different scriptures, different senses that people have had about our churches and our area just over the last couple of years. And just beginning to sort of bring that together in some sort of short form that we can grab a hold of. But I think sort of boiling that down, I guess the first stage in that dream is what the churches look like. And I think this is really important because I know we have a deep heart for our communities. But actually, I think God always wants to work through the church. God loves his church, who he refers to and regards as his bride. And God's vision for his bride is that she's pure and spotless and ready for all that God's got. And so I think the first stage you look at that is is the renewal of the church. The second stage, as you look through the dream, just as it sort of came together, is the atmosphere amongst the communities. And then, as you read further, you begin to see the transformation and the creativity, the life, the pioneering of kingdom ministries, projects, entities, and how that begins to work through schools, our businesses, and then our streets, our neighbourhoods, and our homes, as that unfolds.
Okay.
I think the reason I shared in this way at the Benefice Agronomy evening is because I think if we together sense that this is God, then I think it is important that over the course of this year and beyond that we begin to really embrace this and begin to say, do you know what? Actually, you know, we sense God's grace is in this. We sense that when we begin to unpack this and unfold it, we do sense that God is in this and is stirring our hearts towards this. So I think just that embracing of this as God's identity and calling on us, I think is really important. And then undergirding that, I think is really a kind of almost like a decision that we as individuals and we as churches decide to say, do you know what, if this is our identity and calling that God is unfolding for us, then we've got to give ourselves to this in our hearts.
Okay.
And I think just beginning to seek God amongst all that we do. We're still going to do Christmas, we're still going to do Easter, we've still got funerals to conduct with all our might, we've still got weddings to do, we've still got schools to serve, we've still got people to care for, small groups to run, all the business of church. But underneath all that we begin to set our sights and really hunger and thirst for God to pour out his Spirit on which the kingdom is built and established, and that would really begin to undergird all that we do, all that we are, and then begin to quietly just renew our structures, renew how we do things to reorientate our lives around the kingdom.
Yeah, makes sense.